The US has just delivered a significant blow to Trinidad and Tobago's energy sector, revoking key licenses that allow the country to collaborate with Venezuela on vital natural gas projects. This decision is part of America's broader strategy to isolate Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. However, at the same time, it also sends shockwaves through the Caribbean, where Trinidad, the region's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas, is now left grappling with severe economic repercussions. With energy reserves dwindling and global oil prices unstable, the country's future is hanging in the balance. In this video, let's have a look at the consequences of this bold move to potentially end the Trinidad-Venezuela oil deal and what's ahead for Trinidad's economy. Let's get started. Previously, America had granted key licenses to the Caribbean country for developing natural gas projects with Venezuela. However, with the new leadership in the US, things are changing for the Caribbean as well, since the Trump administration just revoked the licenses granted to Trinidad. This newly elected president has taken a hard line against Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. This decision attempts to suffocate his regime by blocking its oil exports. However, it will also take a serious toll on the Caribbean region. Trinidad is the largest exporter of liquefied natural gas in Latin America. Oil and gas constitute 80% of the country's exports and 40% of its GDP. Between the falling global oil and gas prices since the OPEC Plus decision to increase output and the possibility of tariffs on American exports, Trinidad has had a few bad weeks. Not only that, but the country's energy reserves have been steadily declining. But at least there was a silver lining, a proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. These agreements with Venezuela ensure the country's prosperity in the long run. But now, that's gone too. The PDVSA-PetroCaribe Relationship also influenced the region's energy dynamics. The Chavez administration in Venezuela formed an energy bloc in the region and started providing subsidized oil to Caribbean countries like the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Jamaica. In 2005, a trade organization named PetroCaribe was founded, allowing member Caribbean states to import Venezuelan oil on good terms. The Venezuelan state oil company PDVSA offered oil to member countries who had to pay 60% of the bill within 90 days. The other 40% can be paid over 25 years at 1% interest. After the 2013 oil crash, PDVSA found it hard to maintain output. The country's economy went into free fall, and by 2018, Venezuela announced it was ending oil shipments to PetroCaribe members. CARICOM countries have already felt the impact of the US sanctions on Venezuela, which have significantly reduced their access to affordable credit and even led to fuel shortages in some nations. However, in 2022, St. Vincent and the Grenadines resumed receiving Venezuelan oil under the PetroCaribe agreement, offering some relief to the region. Despite this, CARICOM countries have repeatedly urged the US to lift its sanctions, but America's growing disdain for PDVSA's corruption and the Venezuelan government's increasing alignment with geopolitical rivals like China and Russia has only intensified the pressure. US-Venezuela relations were notably different in the latter half of the 20th century. With the largest oil reserves in the world, its oil fields were highly sought after by multinational energy companies. After the 5-month OPEC embargo following the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Venezuela had the highest per capita income in Latin America. However, the 80s oil glut sent the country's economy spiraling. Despite the setbacks, the output and the economy somewhat recovered. Even after Chavez's election in 1998, America continued importing oil from PDVSA. Chavez's socialist bent strained his country's relations with America. Non-democratic practices and human rights abuses have been rampant ever since Maduro came into power in 2013, and to neutralize his regime, the US has increasingly imposed sanctions. During his first term, US President Donald Trump prohibited Venezuela's access to US financial markets before imposing sweeping sanctions on PDVSA and freezing Venezuelan government assets in the US. The Biden administration gave temporary relief to the country's oil and gas sector in 2022 on the condition that Maduro would hold free and fair elections. After a hopeless 2-year period, Joe Biden refused to renew that agreement. US President Donald Trump has escalated the pressure on Venezuela by taking several significant actions. First, he revoked Chevron's authorization to operate in the country. Second, he cancelled the licenses of major companies like Repsol, Eni, and Morel and Prom. And third, he imposed a 25% tariff on countries importing Venezuelan oil, which directly impacts several Caribbean nations. These aggressive measures are part of the broader US strategy to isolate Venezuela and weaken its government. But they are also creating a ripple effect across the region, particularly for countries like Trinidad and Tobago, which rely on Venezuelan energy agreements to secure their economic future. By the way, if you're finding this video insightful, please like it and don't forget to subscribe to our channel as well. Your support helps us bring more amazing content to you. Thank you. The Venezuelan oil licenses is the latest in a long line of attempts to isolate Venezuela. Unfortunately, there are other regional players at work here who will suffer from Trump's wrath. After Donald Trump had cancelled Chevron's licenses to operate in the sanctioned country, many wondered whether the Dragon gas deal was next. The Dragon gas field, located off Venezuela's coast, holds nearly 4 trillion cubic feet of gas reserves. In 2023, Venezuela granted Shell a 30-year permit for the field, with plans to export gas to its Caribbean ally by 2026. Stuart Young, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, estimated the field could start with an output of 175 million cubic feet per day before ramping the production up to 350 million cubic feet. The other field, Manakin-Cocuina, is estimated to contain 1 trillion cubic feet of gas. A 20-year agreement between BP and the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago mandated that 25% of the gas be supplied to TT's petrochemical sector and the rest feed the country's LNG industry. Due to sanctions, companies like Shell and BP required US licenses to negotiate, plan, and develop the projects. These companies have now handed a May 27 deadline to wind down activities in the region. The recent cancellation would set the expansion plans of oil companies back by a few years. The financial loss incurred by abandoning these projects halfway through would also lead to future scrutiny. Trinidad and Tobago's energy reserves are declining, and this latest setback has added to the country's challenges. The cancellation did not shock TT's Prime Minister. Quote, "I expect us to have the opportunity on behalf of TT to present our case. This doesn't come necessarily as a surprise. Seeing how volatile things are not only with respect to the policy with Venezuela, but what we're seeing with the imposition of tariffs. Trinidad and Tobago is facing social and economic issues. Oil and gas prices have been declining for several years, negatively affecting the Caribbean country's finances. Unemployment, reduced tax revenue, a lack of human development, an aging population, increased crime, escalating gang violence, and foreign exchange shortages are some of the major issues plaguing Trinidad as its underground reserves run dry. These new deals were supposed to be the country's lifeline. The American attempts to counter Russian and Chinese development next door are understandable. However, their approach leaves much to be desired. Pulling Shell, BP, and NGC out of Venezuela would only spur geopolitical rivals like China and Russia to jump in. However, the Caribbean countries cannot disregard US sanctions altogether since their economies rely on energy exports to American markets. The region is stuck between a rock and a hard place. However, despite the challenges, the country's resourcefulness can guide it through. With determination and strategic partnerships, the Caribbean can overcome these hurdles and emerge stronger. What do you think about the US revoking the oil licenses and its potential impact on the Caribbean's future? And can Trinidad navigate these challenges in the face of declining energy reserves and geopolitical pressures? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. And while you're here, you should also check out our video on Guyana's oil future with new US sanctions. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on all the latest discussions affecting the Caribbean. Make sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. This is Caribbean Focus, and we'll see you in the next video.